Talk.
It's time for FLA Law, brought to you by the personal injury attorneys of Perenich, Caulfield, Avril Noyes. This hour will be informative, along with taking your questions and comments. Now, here are your hosts for today's show.
Good evening. It is Tuesday evening at 5 o'clock, and that means we are live on the radio with FLA Law on the radio. This is a live legal call-in talk show. We are here to answer questions you have regarding any areas of law. But this show is put on for Tampa Bay by the law firm of Perenich, Caulfield, Avril Noyes, the longest established personal injury law firm in Tampa Bay. We have been serving Tampa Bay since 1955. We're almost at 70 years, and we're proud to help so many good people. My name is Matthew Noyes, and I'm one of the partners at the law firm of Perenich, Caulfield, Avril Noyes. And I'm here to answer questions that you may have regarding personal injury, workers' compensation, car accidents, car insurance, trip and falls, work injuries, Social Security disability, and any other questions you may think could relate to to personal injury or Social Security law. But I'm not here alone. You don't have to hear this voice for the whole hour. I am blessed to have my friend and my law partner, Lori Robinson, here as well. Lori, thanks for coming on FLA Law on the radio.
Always enjoy being here.
Yeah, you always give our listeners such good information.
Well,
so we
hope
appreciate
so. We
that.
try.
That's right. So listeners, if you have a question regarding the law, whether it's our areas of law or any areas of law, give us a call on the law line at 727-441-3000, and we would be able to take your call live on the radio. Now, you may say, I don't want my question to be on the radio. I don't want to hear my voice. Well, we have other ways that you can get your questions to us without having to hear your voice on the radio. We are live streaming the show on the law firm's Facebook page. That Facebook page is Perenich, Caulfield, Avril Noyes Injury Lawyers. And you can see Lori and myself right here in the studio. And you can type in your questions right in the comments. And I'm looking at it right here, and I can see any questions that you may have. And so that's another way you can reach out to us in the next hour to get your questions answered. We have found in the many decades of helping the Tampa Bay community that many people have questions and are too afraid to ask a question or think that their question is not a good question. But Lori, you and I have been answering questions for many decades now. Is there ever a bad question that somebody can ask us?
No, not at all. And I do think people, they don't necessarily, unless they know a lawyer, they really don't know who they would ask. And so maybe the worst thing you could do is what people tend to do, which is ask a friend who might or might not know. But, the law is very complicated. I'd have to say, having practiced for 45 years, I don't even know how that's possible. And it's really not, you're not going to get the best information. A lot of times people think they know, but they don't really know the nuances and the changes that happen all the time.
No, that's for sure. The law does change all the time.
It's surprising, really.
And we see some people, they say, well, I only have one question. I don't want to call a lawyer and have to pay a lawyer to ask one question.
Always that concern.
But here you don't pay a lawyer. You just have to listen to our show and feel free to call us on the law line. Another thing they turn to often is they turn to, all this weekend I was calling it Dr. Google, but now it's Google Esquire.
No question need go unanswered. I love it.
And so, but the problem is if you go on to Google and ask your question, every state is different with their laws. And so you may be thinking that you're getting the answer to your question, and it could be the furthest from the truth in Florida.
Right. And then the other, because, I'll look at Google, even at lawyer sites and areas of law that maybe I'm not familiar with. But as a lawyer with deep experience, I know the context. I know, because everything can be so fact specific. So a lot of things really, you can have a general principle, but may or may not apply to a particular set of facts. Well, you'd really have to have more than you're going to get in the typical Google search to answer that question, particularly if you don't even have, the context. It's not anything you really know about. So I love Google personally myself, but it has to be utilized in the proper way and really with great care.
Right. Too many times you don't know what question is the right question to ask.
Right.
And so Google's trying to do that thinking for you.
Well, we've discovered that even with AI, that's a big deal these days, artificial intelligence, and it's coming into of course, the legal area, the legal domain, and we have it available at the office, and we kind of have fun posing a few questions. Sometimes for something kind of straightforward, it's very, very good and efficient.
We've seen that.
But we've also seen that for things that have a few more nuances, you really need the relevant background, and thank goodness the human being.
Right. It's too vanilla is what I think it is. It just doesn't delve into the actual situation that your question is about.
Which isn't to minimize it certainly can be helpful in certain areas, but there's a lot to digest in the process of really understanding most legal questions.
Right. So if you have one of those legal questions, give us a call on the law line at 727-441-3000. Now, I came down here from Chicago back in 1976, and I have been in the Clearwater area ever since then. I went to St. Cecilia's School. My mom taught me there.
Yep.
I went to Clearwater Central Catholic High School. My brother taught me there. And then I did St. Pete College and USF and then Stetson, all in Tampa Bay. And so I thought I've been here for a long time. But Lori, your story is even better. Why don't you tell our listeners?
Now you still do, being here all those years, you qualify as kind of, you've kind of been grandfathered in almost. There's some term for that escapes me. But I actually am a true Florida cracker, a true Florida native. In Clearwater, I was actually born at Morton Plant Hospital in a year that will remain unstated at this point. Not really. 1955.
Hey, that's the birth of our firm,
exactly.
Too. Look at that.
And so who would have imagined that at the time a little baby was being born? Guy Perenich was founding this law firm.
Just down the street in downtown Clearwater, quite honestly.
But I kind of love that in that, I'm a little nostalgic, as many of us are, for some of the older days of Clearwater, but by the same token, I love being a part of a firm that's so much a part of the community and has been for so many years. And that kind of does also, it's formed and shaped us, because you started there even before you became a lawyer.
Right.
So it's formed and shaped us as to the way we practice law and what we're trying to do. Solve people's legal problems, get them compensation that they're entitled to, and bring them through the process in a way that makes it a little less, formidable, because most people are pretty concerned and scared of going through any kind of legal process.
Yeah, sure. Now, I became an attorney because I got in a pretty serious car accident when I was 16 years old, and I collapsed my lung, broke my hip, tore my rotator cuff and such. And I had a very good attorney who's still practicing now help us out. But we got to see how the insurance company tries to take advantage of people that don't know the ins and outs of the insurance industry and what to do after a car accident. But how about you, Lori? What made you want to be a lawyer?
For me, I love debate. I was always very quiet and shy, actually, in my school period. But around the time of sixth grade, 12 years old or thereabouts, I was involved in a debate. It actually was on a criminal topic, the pros and cons of capital punishment. But I became so excited by debate. And that kind of fueled me. And then I read a book by a very famous lawyer, about a very famous lawyer. It was Earl Rogers, who was a lawyer in California. It actually turned out he was the sort of the model for the Perry Mason character, many years ago. And of course, those are available now still on, of course, streaming and stuff. And they're great legal programs. So I just loved the debate, the argument of law and being a lawyer. And so I was very interested in that. That led me to participate in debate during high school, and that's college. And then I went on to law school at the Florida State I never lose the big games. Okay,
that's right.
Except right now because of our competition at the office.
You haven't won the game yet if you're an FSU fan.
But that was undergrad. But I went to University of Florida Law School and then went down and practiced with a public defender in West Palm for a decade, really in the criminal area, which was, of course, that's exactly what I envisioned. All of the debate being applied in the courtroom on behalf of the criminally accused. And then after 10 years, I went into personal injury ultimately, which in the civil area is the courtroom area. That's where you can experience what many people think of as a lawyer, but actually very few lawyers actually are practicing courtroom litigation advocacy. I mean, that just isn't it's not a large segment of the law field, really.
Right. And you mentioned Perry Mason, and I guess there's also, a new series coming out. It's the new Madlock, I think.
Is it? Oh, yeah. Wow. I'll watch that.
Yeah, it looks like it's pretty good. But we always talk about, especially when we're picking a jury, that, this isn't like a TV show. You don't have a car accident and then within an hour you have all the evidence and the jury comes back with a decision. Quite the opposite in the real world. Can you tell our listeners just globally, if they're involved in a car accident, what process do they have to go through before they can finally see some closure?
Yeah, it can be, it can vary, but it's always going to be at a minimum many, 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 many months, and often it's going to be a year or more. And what's involved there is, if you're in a car accident and you are injured, initially it's going to take some period of time to know what the outcome is going to be of your injury.
Right.
Obviously, we hope that you're going to get better and it'll all go away. And if it all goes away, fantastic. That's the best case scenario. But many times we see in car accidents that particularly people that will sustain what are often called soft tissue injuries, whiplash type injuries, other injuries as well. But a lot of times, you can get better to a certain point, but sometimes, unfortunately, you never really recover to where you were before, and you have some degree of residual permanent injury.
Right. That's when you reach that magical point of a maximum medical improvement.
And so depending on what your problem is, what your injury is, and how your course of care goes, you have to get to that point, that maximum medical improvement, before you really know what are you looking at, what are your full damages. And so at that point, depending on the situation, that might be at 6 months, it might be at a year. It will again depend on what is happening with your medical care. So long as you're getting better, great, but at some point you're either going to be as well as you're ever going to be, or, not have symptoms at all. But, the people we're dealing with, unfortunately, they do have symptoms and they're ongoing. So in that situation, once you are at maximum medical improvement, we try to put the case together at that point, hoping we can get it resolved for the person. And that would involve a demand to the insurance company, and then lots of factors involved in that, trying to negotiate the case so that it can be resolved without having to go into a lawsuit. Most people would prefer not to go into a lawsuit.
Sure.
And that may take, depending again on how long it took to get to your ultimate outcome, another several months to see if the case can be resolved. We've seen over the years that the insurance companies have gotten harder and harder to deal with. So more cases than used to be the case are in a situation where to get a reasonable result, you have to file a lawsuit.
Right. They're under-evaluating the claim, thinking that the lawyer won't take it to litigation, or thinking that they convince the jury that the people are faking their injury or faking the accident. And so many times our clients don't want to go into litigation, but the insurance company makes us go into litigation. They create
that situation. And the insurance company, they're in business to save money. So they really play upon the fact that most people really do not want to go into litigation. And obviously, no one's going to force you into litigation. It's a decision you make. And probably, I'm going to guess, because of how the insurance companies are, probably a lot of people along the way may elect not to go into litigation. But often it will be what you should do to get a reasonable result in your case. And in those situations, again, it can vary how long it's going to take. But if it's a case where you have to go into litigation, you file your lawsuit, you serve the defendant. There's what we call discovery, where there are depositions of the witnesses, which would include the person that was injured, the plaintiff. And eventually you get to a mediation, which is a settlement conference. Most cases will get resolved at that point. Some percentage will not. And then those after that, you get yourself a trial date. But that trial date is probably, they actually project now the courts want you to set that trial date about 18 months after the lawsuit was filed.
Right.
That's kind of aspirational.
Yeah, that seems like it's so far away, but
it's hard.
In our real world, it's really hard to get the case all prepared up for a jury trial in 18 months.
Yeah, there's just many things that occur like that. But the courts are trying to encourage what would be considered a speedy resolution, even though that will not sound speedy to most people, But regardless, if your case had to go all the way to a trial, you're definitely looking at something like 18 months, 2 years. But most settle at mediation, and then most that don't settle at mediation will settle between mediation and trial, because there are many good reasons for the case to get resolved. But in order to have the leverage to get the best result possible in your situation, you really need the guidance of attorneys that do this. And that's why we are here offering our comments and our experience on this so that you can get the best result. And if the insurance company knows you have lawyers that will take the case all the way, if that's what needs to happen, you have a better chance of not having to take it all the way and getting a better result than you would have if you hadn't been willing to stand up just a little bit to the insurance companies. And they need to have people stand up to them.
And if it does have to go to a jury trial, on average, what's a typical length of a jury trial?
Well, that's something that's definitely different than TV, because on TV, it's, an hour or something like,
That's right. With commercial breaks.
Really. But no, the typical auto accident case, which would be the most common civil case that would be tried, is going to be 3 to 4 days, could even bleed into the 5th day of the week. So a person would set aside a week to be in court, because there are a lot of parts of the trial. The parts that you only see little tiny clips on TV don't really give you the full effect. I mean, the jury selection is going to take a whole afternoon in our jurisdiction. I mean, basically it's going to be 2 or 3 hours. And then you, depending on the number of witnesses, that's going to be days. You have the opportunity to make an opening statement beforehand. And that's the kind of thing you'd see a little bit of on TV.
Right.
But you'd see it in a different setting than in the real world of a courtroom, basically, where there are many things you can't say, including that the other party has insurance.
That's right. For example, our partner, Mark Perenich, is in trial right now.
Yes.
He picked a jury not last Friday, but the Friday before, went all week last week in trial, and is still in trial now.
Now, that is a medical malpractice case, and those tend to
take a little longer, more experts and such.
Right, I think because of the expert testimony, that makes it a longer trial. But so it's a pretty big undertaking. I always tell our clients, when we're getting ready for a trial, don't worry. Of course, easy for me to say that, but we spend a lot of time acquainting the person, practicing with them, letting them understand the kind of questions they'd be asked, so that they're not unprepared for the experience. But again, most people would prefer to avoid it. But if your case should go to trial, then it's certainly what we love. There's nothing better than getting a good result in a trial.
Right.
A hard fought battle. But to reassure people, most times that you don't have to go to that length. But it is often the case that you have to be willing to stand up to the insurance company through the litigation process. And then ultimately, they don't really want to try every case they've got.
They're in the business of risk management.
That's right.
And so if we can show them what risk it is, then they may manage to file a little better.
Yes.
But one thing that we hear a lot in our litigation cases, especially in our auto accident cases, is I'm the victim. Our client says, I'm the victim here. How come I'm under the microscope?
Right.
How come they're questioning me and getting all this information? I totally understand their position.
Absolutely.
But why don't we tell our listeners why that is? Why are our clients, the ones who get hurt at no fault of their own, why are they such under the microscope and being examined so much?
Well, I think first it's important to put it in the context of our civil jury system, which with all of its problems, and it has many, is still the best in the world.
Amen.
So we have a situation that allows people to take their disputes to their fellow citizen, in a jury trial. So as a result of that, we have what's called an adversarial system. So we represent plaintiffs, people that are injured in auto accidents. The insurance company hires lawyers that will represent the driver that caused the accident, the defendant. And so they have a right to investigate the case. And so during that, but it is definitely seems foreign to an individual going through it because you've got, like you say, that you've gone through this, you were injured many times, a situation, maybe it's a rear end collision and you say, what are they talking about? But it is a part of our adversarial process that allows each side to have their attorney investigate the case and look into everything that might be a defense. Usually the biggest defense in our personal injury settings, the biggest issue is going to be the extent of the damages.
Right.
And so they're often, anybody of any age may have had some pre-existing medical issues that may have been made worse by the accident, or they may have nothing to do with the accident. But as a part of investigating the case, the defense is going to be asking questions and getting records and things like that. And
we see that a lot. We see the defense, the insurance company lawyers subpoenaing records from our clients, doctors from now to 20 years ago.
Yeah, as far back as they can go often.
Yeah,
Really.
and the client says, well, what does those records have anything to do with my accident now? I had a knee surgery and I hurt my back in this accident.
Right.
So why do they need my knee records?
Right. But there are many issues in a personal injury case. So one of them is the actual expenses you incur, the medical expenses, any lost wages. But the other component is what we call pain and suffering, the emotional distress, really probably the biggest factor for most people, how your life is impacted.
Sure.
And in that situation, any other injury that you have had to deal with does have an arguable relationship to evaluating the impact on you and your life. Now, it does depend. I always explain to clients at mediation, each side, the lawyers, what we do is we take the set of facts available on our side and we argue in favor of our client.
Right.
They're never going to convince us of the other side's position, and we're not going to convince them of our position for our client. But what we're doing is showing what arguments can be made. And then, like you were saying a moment ago, the insurance lawyer and adjuster, they're going to evaluate the risk of, is a jury going to listen to the arguments that the plaintiff's attorneys are making? And are they going to agree with those? Is there a risk of that? And how much of a risk and how big are those damages going to be? And that gives them an incentive to look at the case and try to get it resolved if they can. Yeah. But that's how it works in the court process. So the lawyers are advocates for a person. And it's our desire on each side to be a zealous advocate for that person.
And we had a situation, we had a case that's still going on, actually, where our client had a slip and fall down in Miami. He lives up here, but he had a fall in the Miami area. So, but our client lives here and he treated here and such. He had a great question of, why do I have to file in Miami? And then he was even more perturbed when the insurance company's lawyer said, well, you got to go see one of our doctors
in Miami, right?
And you have to go see him in Miami. Why is that? Why, if he fell down there, but he's treated up here and he's injured, no fault of his own, why does he have to go to Miami for all that? Because
there are laws that set the jurisdiction where cases are to be brought. And in that case, the defendant is down there in Miami. That's where the event occurred. And you're required to bring the case where the event actually occurred. And so, it's an inconvenience, obviously. Yeah.
Right.
But that's a part of the way it goes.
Right. And part of our job is to try to see which a venue, I guess, is to see if we can get a venue that's more convenient.
Sometimes you can.
For our clients. So if the employer or if the place had a location up here in Pinellas County or in Hillsborough County, even though he fell down there, we may have been able to file the lawsuit here, but that wasn't the case in that situation.
Right. And very often it won't be in something like a trip and fall like that. I mean, really, but we would look for ways, and sometimes that can happen. And sometimes the lawyer that gets assigned by the insurance company, they're here, they're happy to have it located here. But many times the venue is not going to work quite like that.
So what happens then, and we're talking about venue, what happens if we're driving down on Gulf to Bay and you get involved in a crash, and the crash is caused by somebody who lives in New York. You try to get the case resolved, you can't get it resolved, and you have to file a lawsuit. Where can that injured person file the lawsuit if the person who caused the crash lives in New York and was just down here visiting?
Once again, the law sets where the venue is going to be in that situation, and the accident occurred here in Pinellas County, so it's going to be filed here, and we're going to have to get that defendant served. Now, the law provides for, if you are driving a vehicle here in Florida, you're going to be subject to the Florida jurisdiction. So there can be kind of sometimes complicated issues with getting a defendant from out of state served, particularly if they don't want to be a part of it. But for the most part, you're going to serve them where they are. And if they evade service, there's some other provisions to
hoops
serve.
And hurdles to jump through.
But that's definitely too much in the weeds.
We need a lot more than just an hour to go.
And we would put everybody to sleep.
Okay. And everything like that.
Not really.
Well, that's Lori Robinson. I'm Matt Noyes, and we are two attorneys at the law firm of Perenich, Caulfield, Avril Noyes, the oldest personal injury law firm in Tampa Bay, helping people involved in personal injury matters since 1955. Part of our help is to put on this show every Tuesday from 5 until 6. It is a live call-in show. And so if you have a question regarding the law, give us a call on the law line at 727-441-3000. And I asked that question right before our break, because when we get back from our break, I have this little question for you is, what is the most dangerous month to drive in Florida?
Oh my gosh.
So we'll be right back right after this break to answer that question and more.
This is the Tan Talk Radio Network.
After a car accident, there are many questions that you need answers to. Who pays for my car repairs? Who pays for the medical bills? What about my lost wages? And more. The personal injury law firm of Perenich, Caulfield, Avril Noyes has been answering these questions for their clients for nearly 70 years. Since 1955, they've been a voice of the injured in the legal system. As one of the longest established law firms in Tampa Bay, Perenich, Caulfield, Avril Noyes is here to answer your questions. Listen to their live call-in radio show on this channel every Tuesday evening from 5 to 6 p.m. or call them at 727-796-8282 or visit them at voiceoftheinjured.com. Offices Clearwater, non-attorney spokesperson.
This is the Tan Talk Radio Network.
We are back from our break. This is Attorney Matthew Noyes. I'm here with my law partner, Lori Robinson. We are the two of the attorneys at the law firm of Perenich, Caulfield, Avril Noyes, the proud providers of FLA Law on the radio every Tuesday from 5 until 6, just like Paul Porter just said on that commercial. We are here to answer your questions regarding the law. The number is 727-441-3000. So give us a call if you have questions, or if you don't want to be on the air but you still have a question, jump on Facebook on our live feed of the show at Perenich, Caulfield, Avril Noyes Injury Lawyers. And you can type in your question right in the comments and we'll be able to answer those questions for you. But right before the break, I did ask a question. I asked Lori, I said, what is the most dangerous month to drive in Florida? Lori, do you have a guess on that?
Well, I did a little quick Google search and asked somebody very informed on such things. But if you think about our tourist season, and our tourist season probably does kick off in the spring, and March turns out to be the month where there has historically been the highest number of accidents. And you can think about spring break, which obviously really living anywhere in Florida. I mean, South Florida, over here, you got all the students.
Daytona, all over. And you're right, because it says March is the month that Florida is flooded with college students who visit from out of state to celebrate their spring break from classes.
So now, well, I was lucky. I didn't have to come to Florida during spring break. I was already in Florida.
That's right. And also, March is also the last month before the snowbirds start to head back north.
Yes.
So you got college kids and snowbirds.
Right.
And in fact, that's why tourists caused 12% increase in car crashes.
Wow.
In Florida.
And you can see, of course, just thinking about how accidents happen. I mean, people that are not as familiar with the streets they're driving on, they don't know where they're going.
Right. No, that happens too much. So we talked about what is the most dangerous month. I didn't tell Lori this answer. What's the safest month of Florida? And that would be August. And it's August because the vacationers are already gone home and the snowbirds are waiting for the hurricane season to end. And so August is the safest month to drive in Florida. The numbers show that, according to the study, numbers show there was 36,280 crashes in March of 2023. And in August, there was 32,408 crashes. So it's about a 3,800 crashes difference between those two states, two months. So it is interesting, and that also makes us think. Okay, we're talking about people that are visiting, causing these crashes. One thing that is a challenge for us is if these visitors are renting vehicles and causing a crash while they're renting a vehicle. Google Esquire may not tell you the answer, but in Florida, you have a big challenge when you're involved in a crash caused by somebody renting a vehicle. Why is that, Lori? What is that challenge?
The challenge is that if the person's rented a vehicle, the law does not require the rental companies to have the liability insurance to cover that person for any automobile accident they cause.
So even though they're the owner, the rental car is the owner of the vehicle, they're not responsible.
No, and you would normally, because we have what we call the dangerous instrumentality doctrine in Florida. The owner of a vehicle is responsible for their own negligence causing an accident while driving that vehicle, or anyone else they allow to drive the vehicle. I mean, that's absolutely black letter law by statute in Florida. And this really came as a result of a federal law that was passed called the Graves Amendment, and in which there was kind of a rescue operation of the rental car industry. Now, if you were in the rental car industry, you thought it was great, but for the individual, it's very, very tough. The case that pops into my mind now that I had a couple of years ago now, but I mean, it worked out all right, but it's an more unusual situation because the person was driving a rental company car, like an enterprise type thing, that caused the accident. This person was really the girlfriend of someone, and they actually came from like some foreign country. I won't say what that is at this moment, but so here they were they were tourists, just like we're talking about.
Right.
Terrible accident in downtown Tampa. So what fortunately happened was, but you can't count on this, is that the actual insurance that you're going to have PIP, the actual insurance coverage, the car that there was coverage available because this particular person that was the driver was an insured under a person that was a resident here in Tampa. So this illustrates, just as I'm trying to explain this, how complicated all this stuff is. Because this is something I ended up researching up the wazoo because because you can be SOL. So as far as the responsibility of the rental car company, nothing. We get
Right.
nothing from them, Yeah. Fortunately, there was other applicable insurance for, but that would be the issue, really.
Right.
The person driving the car, what insurance do they actually have? And they, in that situation, like if I'm driving a rental car and I cause an accident, my liability insurance will cover me. But in this situation, we had the extra complexity. These people were tourists from overseas, but they were visiting an individual that lived here, family or something like that. And it happened that the person that was actually driving the rental car wasn't insured on this policy. It was very complicated.
Yeah.
The non-complicated part is that, if the person driving has their own insurance, their liability insurance, you may have some recourse. But a lot of people don't have any understanding of any of that. When they sign insurance stuff for their rental car, they're really only thinking about what they might have to pay if they get into a wreck to the rental company.
Right. And if they are from another country or Canada as well as another country, but they're from Canada and they don't, even if they have bodily injury liability coverage, if they don't want to provide that bodily injury liability coverage information to you, the only alternative you have is to sue the person.
Right.
And then, as we kind of talked about before the break, is trying to get that person's car insurance information is a huge task because they're outside of the state of Florida,
Right.
or outside of the country even.
So this perfect illustration that you can't really become your own lawyer and look on Google and try to figure this stuff out.
No, you can't. I mean, there's so many stones that need to be overturned to find out. I was talking to somebody who was involved in a crash over the weekend. I was talking to him on Sunday, and he was like, "Well, where do you find coverage?" And he had an odd situation as well. And it's like, well, you have to look here to find coverage, and then if there's no coverage there, then you have to go over to this household to see if there's coverage. And if you weren't driving your vehicle, we have to find out if the owner of the vehicle had uninsured motorist coverage, and what about the PIP coverage? Who pays that? It is so complicated,
right? And then
that you can't really do it yourself.
But it also illustrates the importance of your favorite topic and mine, always working in a way to talk about the importance of uninsured motorists.
Right.
Because in these situations that can be we have a lot of tourists. So it is not at all unlikely to be involved in an automobile accident caused by somebody who's a tourist renting a car.
Right. And even if it wasn't a tourist, in the state of Florida, you're not required to carry bodily injury liability coverage. So the chances of getting hit by a car that does not have bodily injury liability coverage is way too high.
Yes,
unfortunately. And the way to reduce that risk is to get that uninsured motorist coverage.
Right.
Now, you can't get uninsured motorist coverage unless you have bodily injury liability coverage yourself.
Yes.
But uninsured motorist coverage is the most important coverage to have.
Probably so we'll say that obviously got to have the legal liability with decent limits. And that's something that, again, not a bad idea to talk with. I'm probably a lawyer really about. I mean, we take calls all the time to just try to provide general information to people that have a question, and we do this show for this reason too, because you need adequate liability insurance. I mean, many people will have $10,000, $25,000, and obviously you have to look at what you can afford, but in reality, in today's world, that's not very much coverage. In fact, it's not anywhere close to enough if there's any kind of a significant accident.
And we've seen other situations where our client who got hurt will have $100,000 worth of bodily injury liability coverage, but no uninsured motorist coverage. And really what that does is he's paying premiums to protect the whole world from his safe driving.
Right.
And he's doing nothing to protect him and his family from the world's bad driving.
Right.
We all know that there's bad drivers out there. We see it. I saw it on the way here from the office. It was a little crazy. And so uninsured motorist coverage is so important, that's for sure. But we talked about rentals, but Florida does have a little caveat also, which is a little more helpful for those who get hurt. And that is if you get hurt by somebody who is driving Uber or Lyft or those ride-sharing types of vehicles. The law, I I say recently, but it's probably not that recently anymore. But several years ago, the
Uh-huh.
law changed, and they held Uber and Lyft and other ride-sharing companies more responsible for injuries caused by their drivers.
Mhm.
And there's a certain amount of coverage that they must carry for bodily injury liability coverage. And it's an amount of coverage if there's nobody in the vehicle, if there's no passenger in the vehicle, or if there is somebody in the vehicle, if he's on the clock, so to speak, then that coverage is up to $1 million. And so that's a good law because in typical Florida, no one's required to carry bodily injury liability coverage, except for if you're an Uber or a Lyft driver. They're required to carry liability coverage. And it makes sense. They're on the road a lot.
They're on the road a
They're
lot.
putting a lot of people at risk.
And you'd say, because it used to be, the taxis, and there's very limited coverage, and then that changed some. But probably with the Uber and Lyft, there's probably much, and you've got plenty of people on the road that are basically just regular people driving. Yeah, so we see a lot of accidents.
We do see a lot of accidents. And the sad thing is, those coverages come into play if the Uber driver causes the crash.
Right.
If you're a passenger in an Uber vehicle that gets involved in a crash, they're not required to carry uninsured motorist coverage.
Right.
And most times they don't. And so you have to turn to your uninsured motorist coverage. But so many times we see Uber drivers causing crashes. And so that coverage protects the other vehicle that the Uber driver may have caused damage to, or the people in that vehicle. But it also covers the passenger in the Uber vehicle, because if they get hurt because of the negligence of the Uber driver, they're entitled to make a claim under their bodily injury liability coverage. So there is one bright future, right? One bright
yes, that
light.
certainly seems very, very reasonable and important, actually.
Right, and if you have, I know when I'm a tourist in places, I Uber all the time.
Very, very common. Obviously, it's so convenient.
And
everybody enjoys it.
In Florida, the more Uber drivers out there that our tourists are using, kind of the more protection we other drivers have. So that's a good thing. But I also want to we're talking about how beautiful Florida is and all that. Well, we see a lot of these. We see a lot of bicycle accidents. Florida is notorious for bicycle accidents. And it's not always kids that are the ones who get hurt in a bike accident. Many times it's those adults that are involved in bicycle accidents. I mean, it wasn't here in Florida, but a very sad case with the hockey player and his brother who were riding their bike right before their sister's wedding, the night before their sister's wedding, and a drunk driver passed over and ended up killing Johnny Hockey and his brother as well.
Wow.
Right before their sister's wedding, and both of their spouses were expecting babies.
Oh my goodness!
So it's devastating. And in fact, just last Saturday, there was a bicycle accident on Court Street right here in Clearwater. I pulled this out. The accident happened right after 9:00 on Saturday, September 11th. An adult male was transported to Bayfront Hospital with potential life-threatening injuries. The driver of the car, which was traveling eastbound on Court Street, was not injured and remained at the scene, which is good. We don't hear that all the time, but it's good that they did. And according to the police, the bicyclist was not crossing the street at a crosswalk or at an intersection. So it's sad that this bicyclists get hurt. Many times bicyclists are riding properly and still get injured. I mean, we see it a lot with people turning and turning into the path of the bicyclist, and they get hurt. But what protection does a bicyclist have if they get hurt? Let's do it first. If they don't own a vehicle, how do they make a claim for their injuries if they get hurt through no fault of their own? How do they make a claim?
Well, they would if they had no personal insurance, but they didn't own a car, and they were involved in an accident with a car, then they would be able to claim under the PIP or personal injury protection policy of the car that actually was involved in the accident.
What does the PIP give them, though? What kind of protection do they have?
This is only for medical, really, and lost wages. But basically, it's a small coverage, really. It would be $10,000, it's 80% of your medical, up to $10,000, and lost wages, 60%. I mean, it's mostly usually medical.
Right, and combined, it has to be 10,000.
Right. So it's, and we have all kinds of little tripwires now with our PIP law. You really only have $2,500 coverage unless a doctor says you have an emergency medical condition, and there's a debate about what that is, and then you can get the rest under the policy and that sort of thing. But there would be that. If there was no other coverage, if they weren't living as a resident relative of someone who owned an automobile, but if they weren't listed on that could be an issue. But there would be that possibility. But they're not going to have coverage themselves for their medical other than the liability, which would involve a claim.
Right,
obviously.
we'd have to make a claim against the vehicle's bodily injury liability coverage. And you led me right into it. What if he owned a vehicle? The bicyclist owned a vehicle, but he wasn't driving the vehicle at the time. Who pays his medical bills at first?
Well, I think he would, if he owns a vehicle, his auto insurance is going to pay his medical bills.
And that's what drives some of our clients crazy. It's like, why is my car insurance paying?
Yeah, that's true.
For injuries that I sustained while I was on my bike caused by somebody else.
And there's the genius of and I say that a little bit sarcastically, of our no-fault system, which is supposed to make it very easy and efficient to get care without having to deal with who's at fault. And maybe there's something to be said for that. I mean, really, but it's kind of limited.
Right, it's kind of limited. But that's a confusion that people have. They say, "Oh, well, Florida's a no-fault state. I'm protected." No, the no-fault state just simply means that if you own a vehicle, your medical bills will be paid without trying to determine fault. The argument that they have is that if there's minor injuries with a few $1,000s worth of medical treatment, you want to be able to get those bills paid without having to prove liability, without having to go into making an insurance claim and such like that.
Yeah.
But with $2,000 in medical bills, they only pay 80%, so there's still $400 that's out of your pocket.
Right.
Because of something that you didn't cause, so that seems to be unfair. But I also want to talk about this a little bit because the law did change about comparative negligence.
Yes.
Why don't you let our listeners know a little bit about what comparative negligence was and what it is now? So
there has been a concept in the law that is called comparative negligence whenever you're involved in something that produces an injury as a result of negligence. So the idea is comparative would be, do you have some percentage responsibility yourself? So say you're in an intersection making a left turn and there's an accident, and the insurance company lawyers argue, well, you didn't really have the right of way, or you could have waited. A jury is going to be asked, what percentage of responsibility do you believe is attributable to the plaintiff and to the defendant? Well, it used to be. Now there have been years when if there was any. This is before I started practicing law, so it was a long time ago. Used to be, if it's contributory negligence, there used to be laws that you could not, if you had any responsibility as a plaintiff, you couldn't make any recovery. But then I
think that still is in some states, not in Florida.
Right, and hadn't been for years. And Florida had always been for many, many years that the jury could decide to whatever percentage they thought. Then last year, the law changed so that if the jury were to find that you were more than 50% responsible, no recovery. So it's going back to that idea of almost like if you're responsible, you can't recover at all. And it's not that extreme, but it's still
pretty close.
Very, very close, because you can easily see where a person, if let's just say 51-49 in that situation, that a jury, because obviously what precision is there in any of this? I mean, this is 6 people on a jury trying to hash out and negotiate what they think an ultimate result should be. But that would be a pretty significant amount of responsibility for somebody if they were 49%, that's a lot, So
Right. And I've always had the philosophy is that as plaintiff lawyers, as advocates for the injured, we want to make sure that the at-fault driver pays for everything that they caused,
yes,
what they're accountable for. I don't want them to pay a penny less
right.
than what they're accountable for, but I also don't want them to pay a penny more
Right.
than what they're accountable for. So I always said, well, okay, if it really was 75%, 25% our client's fault, okay. The jury decided it was 75% the at-fault person's fault. Okay, pay 75%. But this statute now that comes and says, okay, if they're 49% at fault, you don't have to pay anything.
Right. And that isn't fair or just at all. I mean, the other system, because what ended up happening is that whatever percentage the jury assigned, that would be deducted, so that the at-fault party would not be paying greater percentage than what their actual responsibility was. So, yeah, I don't think that was a very good change at all.
No.
That was not just.
And I think it probably happened during a full moon. When it happened.
Maybe.
And the reason why I say that is because tonight, a trifecta of moon events.
Ooh.
I know, Lori, I know you like space and all that.
Yes, I do.
But tonight, there will be 3 different lunar spectacles.
Wow.
One, it's going to be a full moon, which is referred to as the harvest moon tonight. But also, this harvest moon is going to be a super moon. And that supermoon is when the moon appears brighter and larger because it's closer.
Okay.
So there's 3.
Yes.
It's the full moon, the harvest moon.
Yeah.
And it is a supermoon.
Yes.
But also, the lunar eclipse is visible at 10:44 tonight.
Excellent.
According to NASA.
I'll be watching.
It starts at 10.
Okay.
And then it goes to about 10:44 is apparently what NASA says it's going to be good. So we sometimes feel that full moons cause crazy drivers.
I have heard that. Yeah. I don't know if that's lore or not, but
I don't know. On the way here, I think maybe if I read that article beforehand, I would say, yeah, it makes sense. Why we're driving what we're driving.
I'm glad you mentioned all that, because I noticed this morning when I was walking my dogs very early that the moon was spectacular.
Oh, it's going to be even better tonight.
Yeah,
so look out there at about 10 o'clock tonight, But Lori, thank you very much for spending another hour with our listeners. We will be back next week, next Tuesday. I'll be back. I'll have my friend and colleague Dennis Moses as my guest, and he will be talking to us about estate planning and probate and such like that. But in the meantime, Lori, if they need to contact us about a personal injury matter, how do they reach out to us?
Well, you can always call us at 727-796-8282 or visit us on our website, usalaw.com or voiceoftheinjured.com.
That's right. And tonight, I encourage you to drive safely, watch out for those who don't, but also to enjoy the moon and its 3 different trifecta experiences.
That's a good little piece of info.
Thank you for listening, and we'll talk to you next week. Take care.